In the mid-1970s, the Soviet Union appeared to stand at the absolute height of its power. Its military stretched across continents, its nuclear arsenal rivaled that of the United States, and its influence reached far beyond Eastern Europe. Across the world, many believed the Soviet system had secured its place as one of the dominant powers of the 20th century. At the center of this vast political machine stood Leonid Brezhnev. Unlike earlier Soviet leaders, Brezhnev was not known for revolutionary speeches or dramatic ideas. He was not a fiery ideologue or a charismatic visionary. Instead, he was a careful political operator who understood how power inside the Soviet system actually worked. When Brezhnev became leader of the Soviet Union in 1964, the country had just experienced years of turbulence under Nikita Khrushchev. Khrushchev had attempted bold reforms and promised rapid economic transformation. But his leadership style was unpredictable, and his policies often disrupted powerful institutions within the Communist Party. Many officials within the Soviet leadership had grown tired of constant change. They wanted stability rather than experimentation. When Khrushchev was removed from power in a quiet political maneuver, the leaders who replaced him chose Brezhnev precisely because he seemed calm, reliable, and cautious. Brezhnev's leadership style reflected this desire for stability. Instead of dramatic reforms, he focused on preserving the existing system. Ministries were rarely reorganized. Party officials remained in their positions for years, and political conflicts inside the leadership were carefully managed behind closed doors. For many Soviet citizens, the early Brezhnev years felt like a period of improvement. During the late 1960s and early 1970s, the Soviet economy expanded steadily. Industrial output increased, and consumer goods slowly became more available in state stores across the country. Items that had once been difficult to obtain, televisions, refrigerators, and washing machines, began appearing in homes across the Soviet Union. While these products were still scarce compared to Western countries, their growing presence gave many citizens the sense that everyday life was gradually improving. Housing construction was one of the most visible achievements of the era. Massive building programs transformed Soviet cities as rows of prefabricated apartment blocks rose on the outskirts of Moscow, Leningrad, and dozens of other urban centers. These apartments were small and often built quickly, but they solved a major problem. For decades, many families had lived in communal apartments where several households shared a single kitchen and bathroom. Receiving a private apartment, even a cramped one, was a life-changing event. To many people living in the Soviet Union at the time, the Brezhnev era seemed comfortable and predictable compared with earlier decades of war, purges, and political upheaval. Yet beneath this appearance of stability, deeper structural problems were quietly developing. Much of the economic growth during these years depended not on innovation, but on expanding production through traditional methods. The Soviet system relied on adding more workers, building more factories, and extracting more natural resources rather than improving efficiency. At the same time, enormous resources were being devoted to the military. The Cold War rivalry between the Soviet Union and the United States pushed both countries into a massive arms race unlike anything the world had seen before. By the 1970s, the Soviet Union had constructed one of the largest military forces in human history. Millions of soldiers served in its armed forces, supported by thousands of tanks, aircraft, and artillery systems deployed across Eastern Europe. Even more significant was the expansion of the Soviet nuclear arsenal. Intercontinental ballistic missiles, nuclear submarines, and strategic bombers formed a vast deterrent force capable of striking targets across the globe. Achieving nuclear parity with the United States gave the Soviet Union enormous geopolitical influence. But maintaining such a massive military machine required vast industrial capacity and enormous financial resources. Factories that might have produced consumer electronics instead manufactured missile components. Engineers who could have improved civilian technology were assigned to military research and weapons development. Entire cities were built to support secret defense industries. Many of these places did not appear on public maps, and their residents worked on highly classified military projects. While the Soviet government proudly displayed its military strength during parades in Moscow's Red Square, The cost of sustaining that strength placed increasing pressure on the civilian economy. One development temporarily helped conceal these weaknesses. During the 1960s and 1970s, vast oil and gas reserves were discovered in western Siberia, transforming the Soviet Union into a major energy exporter. When global oil prices rose sharply during the 1970s, the Soviet government suddenly gained access to enormous new revenues. These funds allowed the state to import grain, purchase Western technology, and continue financing its global ambitions. For a time, it seemed as if the Soviet economic system had discovered a reliable path to prosperity. Oil money masked many inefficiencies that would otherwise have become obvious much sooner. Politically, Brezhnev's system created stability, but also encouraged stagnation. Senior officials remained in their positions for years, and younger leaders found it difficult to rise within the party hierarchy. Over time, the Soviet leadership became dominated by elderly officials who had spent decades inside the Communist Party bureaucracy. Decision-making slowed, and corruption quietly expanded throughout the system. Despite these internal problems, the Soviet Union continued projecting confidence abroad. During the 1970s, a period known as détente briefly reduced tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States. Diplomatic agreements limited certain nuclear weapons and encouraged cooperation between the two superpowers. In 1975, an American spacecraft even docked with a Soviet spacecraft in orbit, symbolizing a rare moment of collaboration during the Cold War. Yet geopolitical rivalry never truly disappeared. The Soviet Union supported revolutionary movements in several regions of the world, expanding its influence but also increasing its financial and military commitments. The most dramatic turning point came at the end of the decade. In December 1979, Soviet forces invaded Afghanistan in an attempt to stabilize a friendly government that appeared to be collapsing. What Soviet leaders expected to be a short intervention quickly turned into a long and costly war. Afghan resistance fighters launched a determined insurgency that Soviet troops struggled to defeat. The war drained resources from the Soviet economy and damaged the country's international reputation. It also marked the end of the fragile détente between the Soviet Union and the United States. By the early 1980s, economic stagnation had become increasingly obvious. Growth slowed, shortages increased, and many citizens relied on personal connections to obtain basic goods. At the same time, Brezhnev's health deteriorated. Years of stress and illness left him increasingly weak, and much of the government's daily work shifted to other officials within the Communist Party leadership. Brezhnev died in November 1982 after ruling the Soviet Union for nearly 2 decades. His era had created the appearance of stability and strength, but many of the system's deepest problems remained unresolved. Within a few years, a new leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, would attempt to reform the Soviet system. Those reforms would eventually unleash forces that transformed not only the Soviet Union, but the entire global political order.